Here are 21 online reviews of the audiobook titled, Gone with the Wind. Written by Margaret Mitchell and narrated by Linda Stevens. 1. Don't waste your time. It pains me to admit I listened through to the end of this book. Many times I wanted to give up, but the hope that it would at last improve, or that the main character would develop, kept me on the hook. I am an avid audiobook listener and have been trying to listen to the classics. This is not a literary art in any way. Don't buy it if you have any respect for your time. The narrator was the only pleasant aspect to the book. 2. Excellent. Not the first time I've read Gone with the Wind, but the first time I've listened to it on Audible. Linda Stevens does a superb job of narrating a difficult read, with the multiple accents and variations of the English language. I was extremely impressed with the wonderful job she did. The unparalleled descriptive language of Margaret Mitchell makes it almost seem you are there and experiencing the story in real time. The classic tale of love in a now bygone way of life, combined with historical details and keen insight into the nature and personalities of multiple characters, could never be replicated. On top of that, it's such an entertaining and compelling story that you can't stop listening. 3. Are you kidding me? Why do people love this book? So racist. Rhett kills a black person because he was being uppity with a white woman? He said, what else could I do? How about have more respect for life and not be the vilest human on the planet? I just stopped after that, could not hear the N-word one more time. I purchased this audiobook because people gushed over it and I've never watched Gone with the Wind. Truly disgusting. 4. Incredible. To think that some speak of cancelling this masterpiece. I had never read the book or even watched more than a brief scene or two from the movie, so I was not prepared for how truly great this book is. Apart from the human drama, the romance, and the tragedy of the fictional tale she created, Margaret Mitchell gives an in-depth account of an important period of American history, primarily from the point of view of the Georgians who lived through it, and the contrast with simplistic caricatures of the time that we so often encounter today is stark. It seems that she writes with deep love for her native city and state, and maybe there are things that she idealizes, but for the most part her descriptions ring true, and she honestly presents many examples of foolish, wrong thinking, of blindness, of human sinfulness, even on the part of those for whom she feels such sympathy. Whether she is writing of slaves and owners, former slaves and former owners, or poor whites who had nothing to do with slavery, she portrays both the noble and the shameful, the gentle and the cruel, the loyal and the treacherous, the generous and the greedy. She obviously researched the period extensively, explaining not only the historical events but how the people at the time felt about them. 5. Cringeworthy narration. Is this the best narrator they could find to read one of the greatest novels ever written? She doesn't execute one accent correctly. Gerald's Irish brogue, Scarlett's lilting southern charm, the slave's plantation speak, all completely butchered by this narrator. Audible, maybe next time find an actual southerner to read this most southern tale. 6. Still my favorite. This has been my favorite book since I read it almost 50 years ago. Since some people want to ban it, I thought I better go back and revisit it to see what I missed as a teenager. It's still an historical novel and I still learn some things, like about what happened in Georgia politics right after the Civil War. It's still about a very strong female lead character. But this time I got much more out of it about love and family and how differently people see the world, some realistically and some only seeing what they want to see. It about loss and family and obligations and dealing with change. As for banning, there is time for background and explanation in a book that a movie doesn't have time for. I expect most people wanting to ban it have only seen the movie, not read or listened to the book. 7. So disappointing. I thought I would enjoy this book. I loved it when I read it in high school. Alas, it doesn't hold up. I didn't notice the rampant racism in it then, but racism is there and I couldn't finish the book. Otherwise, it's a great story. And please don't tell me that it's not really racism because it existed in a particular time and place when the N-word slid easily off every tongue and that makes it okay. I found that in its treatment and view of black people too offensive to keep reading. 8. Wow. What a train wreck. An amazingly written book. It also gives perspective into racism, and the beginnings of the KKK. I really never understood how it was rationalized before, but the book explains the dysfunctional thinking that was occurring. I can understand why it is such an upsetting book. 9. Absolutely perfect. I enjoyed every minute I listened to this audiobook. The narrator is super talented, the characters, the inflection of her voice, the emotions impregnating every word, she even sings. I didn't want the book to end. As for the story, is needless to say that it's beautiful and enjoyable, interesting, and moving. It made me very happy, I can't praise it enough. 10. An awesome story ruined. This is one of my all-time favorite stories, but I just can't stand listening to one more minute of this narrator. She stumbles through as if this is the first time she has read this story. I'm usually not at all critical of the narration, but my nerves just cannot take another second of this. I must return this audiobook because I am sure not going to waste a credit on this mess. 11. Good writing, horrid characters. The descriptions, the settings, and the historical detail were excellent. Reading about the entitled attitudes of Southerners, who thought owning slaves was right and that God smiled on their cause, was painful. The selfishness, cruelty, and unapologetic immorality of the two main characters was shocking. Dialogue between them was way too long and painful to listen to. Listening to the conniving selfishness of Scarlet and the devilish accusations of Red for 49 hours as an audio, though well read, was far too much and I couldn't finish the book. The movie was much lighter, more interesting and entertaining. 12. Historical fiction well worth reading. This book puts you back in the times of pre-Civil War when life was what plantation owners expected it would be. Then the war came and their lives were torn apart and struggles were their new normal. After the war, Reconstruction brought more pain and hardship for Southerners. Yes, Scarlet was spoiled and an opportunist, but she was strong too. She survived her world being turned upside down. The people in this story were flawed just as we are all flawed. But it gives us insights into human character and the possibility that we can survive our world today being turned upside down. 13. Wow! This is the most racist book I have ever read. I remember reading this as a teen and missing a lot of the racism. I think it would be better if this book was sandwiched between a foreword and an afterword and slathered with footnotes addressing and shedding light on the racism, like the depiction of happy former slaves happily continuing their slave role, etc., and correcting the historical inaccuracies. I fear younger readers or those without context will see in this a justification for racism and slavery and bigotry. I was disturbed that this book did not have that. There also should have been trigger warnings for the N-word and extreme racial violence and a number of other things as well as domestic violence. There's more than one casual Emmett Till type killing just sort of casually thrown in there. In this book, being that murderer doesn't mar one's character even a tiny little bit. Having said that, it's a helpful look into the thought processes and functioning of racism. How bigotry plays out in people's minds, like the authors, and in social settings. Reading this is window into how racist people think, and I feel like maybe I understand some little iota of how Trump-loving Georgians think now. 14. Fantastic read. In spite of my own sensitivity to certain words being used so callously, the narrator does appear to have nailed the performance of the black and white characters alike. As a black man, I've been told this book should be cancelled and avoided at all costs. I gave it a listen specifically because of this, and I'm glad I did. This book paints a painful, yet honest depiction of the antebellum South from the perspective of the characters. I laughed, I cried, I loved and hated the same characters at various points in the book. Unlike many other readers, I thought the ending was the best we could have hoped for. This is, indeed, one of the best books I've ever read. 15. Gone with the Wind, but not quite. After all this time, GWTW is a masterful bit of storytelling recalling to this reader the sweep of Madame Bovary or Anna Karenina. Revisiting this novel in the midst of a society determined to sanitize the history of our Civil War by obliterating any vestige of the Confederacy, Mitchell's singular work crystallizes that frequently romanticized mythical time and place. Indisputably difficult at times, the racial slurs in this novel are at times insufferable, the broad stereotypes and the apologist tone is dissonant to contemporary readers. Yet is Mitchell employing ugly language and romantic sentiment to illuminate how the mythology of the lost cause came to be? I don't know, but a novel with such a feminist undertone nearly throughout the novel, with its strong, determined and unconventional heroine/s, seems capable of being also a subversive, furtive exploration of the how and the why our current racial inequalities persist and the system that propped it up. Now I plan to listen to Eric Foner's History of Reconstruction. 16. An amazing performance and subpar story. The performance was executed very well and made the story more enjoyable. The book was written very well and made reading and understanding easy. As for the story itself, my discontent may be due to my own misunderstanding, but I thought this book was to be one of the greatest love stories written. This book is anything but, it's more like a tragedy. I was very disappointed in it, but at least I can say it's checked off my classics list. I can say I will never reread nor pursue any other works of this author if there are any. I'm sorry to sound so negative, but I really am that disappointed. I hope anyone else who reads this enjoys, but to me it sounds like a scandalous Civil War era smut book mixed with today's high school drama. 17. Wonderful narrator, engrossing literary adventure. This book was even better than I thought it would be, and better than the movie. Margaret Mitchell's descriptions really transport you to another time and place, and it's hard to imagine things in Georgia leading up to / during / after the Civil War were anything other than how she described them if you were seeing them through Scarlett O'Hara's eyes. The book definitely gives you something to think about in terms of preconceived notions about the South and North at that time. That being said, it's apparent to me that Margaret Mitchell was probably passionate about the South and her roots there, and there's a particular dialogue between Scarlett and a Yankee woman in which the Yankee woman is hatefully racist and Scarlett is so horrified and shocked about her driver, a loyal unpaid ex-slave, having heard the racism. There's a lot of love expressed surrounding the slave/master relationship that sounds a little bit idealized, though I'm guessing it wasn't entirely unrealistic. But I kept wanting to hear from a black person who thought about his/her own opportunities, dreams, etc., in a relatable way. I guess, related to that, the biggest flaw to my mind was the depiction of some of the slaves/ex-slaves, particularly a moment describing Big Sam who is so excited to see Scarlett that his eyes roll and his whole body wags like he's wagging his tail. Despite some obvious weaknesses, this book was very rewarding to read. And the narrator is absolutely fantastic, does the accents perfectly. Maybe the best narrator I've heard. 18. Book is a masterpiece, but the narration is bad. This is a masterpiece novel in every way. That said, it's not easy to listen to the Southern view of slavery, but the writing, characterization, the skillful weaving of such complex storylines, the history of battles and more, make this worth reading and rereading. It's been many years since I actually read the book, so I have been looking forward to listening. However, the narration is, compared with some other narrators on Audible, on the awful side. I'm surprised at all the praise for the narration. The narrator often emphasizes the wrong words, pauses in odd places and does many of the voices/dialogue badly. To be fair, there are a great many voices and accents in this book. She's also melodramatic and paced in odd places, like when the topic is the foliage around Tara. All that said, she does some of the voices and speech rhythms well enough, such as Gerald's blustering speech and Irish brogue. For the most part, since this book is much more narrative than dialogue, her affect in so many places is just not appropriate. I'm going to try to keep listening because there are no good alternatives other than reading, and I can't read and organize my closets at the same time. 19. Guilty pleasure. I've always loved this story in spite of the existence of slavery in it. The narration of the story was wonderful with the exception of the horrible affectation taken whenever speaking in slave dialect. When this happens, the narrator sounds like a wheezing, horrible old fool. That is my only criticism. 20. So very different from the movie. So much more. I loved it. I read a review where somebody said it wasn't much different from the movie. There is so much more to Scarlett O'Hara's story. She wasn't that little prissy bitch that everybody made her out to be. Ashley was actually a bed of a weasel, and Rhett Butler turned out to be the real man. Poor Scarlett. We all understand numbing ourselves so that we can proceed forward. She was a woman far beyond her years. Loved it. 21. South be damned. I'm glad I listened to this. It really opened my eyes to how people thought back in the South in those days. It was hard to listen to many of these racial slurs and angered me. If I owned the book, I would burn it. Yet the story was very well written, and I know now why so many have gravitated towards the book. It should only be read by those who want to understand the minds of those who think less of others just for color and race. For those who embrace these ideals, this book will only embolden their negativity. Needs caution. Thank you for watching. Please, do not forget to subscribe, like and share this video. Tune in for more online audiobooks reviews.